This edition of Mac Voices is supported by Care.com, the easy and reliable way to find and manage care for everyone in the family. Save 30% on a Care.com premium membership using the link care.com/MacVoices. And by MacVoices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like Mac Voices, MacVoices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we've had an announcement by Apple that we have a lot of new products coming. One of the ones that I'm not sure if you consider it the least or the most or the middle, I guess it depends on your perspective, is the new Apple TV 4K. And I was trying to figure someone to have an in-depth conversation about this, and I couldn't think of a better person than the guy who has been so critical of the Apple TV, Mr. John Martellaro. John, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for being here.
Nice to be on the show. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's been too long. But you've been busy with background mode and doing all kind of interesting interviews. Including
having you on the show last year.
It
was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. But you've also, you seem to be on a bit of a, is it fair to say like a planetary scientist binge or a space binge, John?
Well, I'm trying to sort of strike a balance, executives and developers. And because of my astrophysics background, it's fun to have astrophysicists on. Dr. Alan Stern was on the show Monday. He makes it very clear he's not an astrophysicist. He's a planetary scientist. He was the principal, still is the principal investigator of the Pluto New Horizons mission, and former NASA administrator, not the chief guy, and was selected as a payload specialist. And he's a licensed pilot, and he's flown in F-104s and Martin B-57's high altitude research astronomy. So he was a fascinating guest, and I know my readers are very technical and often professional, and they like to hear about the life and times and the success stories of all kinds of technical people, whether they're Apple developers or whether they're scientists or researchers or epidemiologists. I've had one on, so it's kind of fun to talk to science people. Dr. Kiki Sanford has her own science podcast, and she's great. So we have a lot of fun just sort of geeking out about science and tech as a sort of a change of pace from the normal rantings about the Apple world, too, because the background mode is mostly about how people got where they are, no matter who they are. So it's fun.
It is, and I always look forward to the refresh when the new one is out, because I feel like I'm never sure what I'm going to get. Am I going to get, as you said, an Apple executive? Am I going to get an astronomy person? Am I going to get a software developer?
Or the editor-in-chief of Car and Driver magazine to talk about autonomous cars. Eddie Elterman was fantastic. He was a fun guest. That was great.
Yeah. So yeah, folks, if you haven't checked it out, it's the Mac Observer's background mode. I'll have a link in the show notes to make sure you can find it. And
thanks for that.
It really is. I really do enjoy it. But we're here to talk about something a bit more mundane than Pluto probes and high-altitude astronomy. We're here to talk about the Apple TV 4K. And I don't want to put words in your mouth because I know your position on some of this, but what did you think when you saw it was announced and they went through the presentation and all the bells and whistles as far as the HDR part? What were your reactions?
Well, I had a preview because a very good developer had looked at the firmware for HomePod and given us some glimmers about what was coming and found references to HDR10 and to Dolby Vision, which is a slightly more advanced version of HDR, but not as heavily used, and hybrid log gamma, which is a broadcast technique to sort of trick the system into doing the equivalence of high dynamic range. So I had that preview, and I was pleased to see that, and so we pretty much knew it was coming. And it was late in coming. One reader pointed out that if we no longer see 4K as a boondoggle 2 years ago, it must have been a boondoggle. But Lots of other people jumped on the pure 4K bandwagon without HDR. And so my premise all along has been that, the way you appeal to people and the way you become a leader in the marketplace and the way you dominate and compete is to be out front as opposed to being behind. And so in 2015, in November, when Apple came out with the 4th generation version, it had no 4K. And it could have. And of course, there wasn't a lot of content therein. Then there is more now, although it's not as pervasive. But, as we know, with the HD revolution, it takes some time. And it's nice to be able to watch selected stuff in 4K and get going with it and see Netflix and Amazon Prime stuff in 4K. So Apple could have, been a leader in that market. And so they came out with one in 2015 that didn't have 4K, which seemed to be kind of lame and not very aggressive. And you can argue that there wasn't any content and there wasn't any sales opportunities. But my argument is that companies that like to jazz their customers and be state of the art and be a leader in the market stay ahead of the game and learn and come up the learning curve and develop the technology. So when the next step comes along, it's natural. It's not so abrupt. So for 2 years, I kind of banged on Apple about the 4th generation version and wasn't real happy with the Siri remote, which we can talk about in a minute. So when I saw the glimmer that Apple was coming out with a 4K, Apple TV 4K with HDR, I thought, this is great. So the next thing I started thinking about was, well, this is a whole fresh start. This is a new revolution. Apple has an opportunity here to do several things, is to, get plugged into the community, to advertise widely. They're developing their own TV content. They want to have a flagship product to demo that content on. They want to have a flagship product that has 4K capability so that they can entice the studios to show their wares and sell their wares through the Apple TV. And so I was hoping that Apple would sort of redesign the product, make it look really cool, have a new Siri remote, just sort of revitalize the product to punctuate that they're back in the competitive game. So when I heard about when Eddie Q showed the new Apple TV 4K, I was a little annoyed that he started off lecturing us about the merits of 4K. We don't need to be told how cool 4K is. Come on, Eddie. But then he went into the important parts of the HDR, and then he waited till the very end and would just sort of let the design of it fall by the wayside. So I was disappointed. We did a Mac Observer Hangouts that we went public with, so you could watch us watch the event, sort of like MST3K, where we're in the audience sort of commenting as we go. And I was going, okay, let's see the design. It's refresh, new remote, new change in box, plastic, swoopy, cool, sexy. No, same old black brick. Since then, the readers and Twitter followers have weighed in and said, no, we kind of like the black brick. Yeah, the black brick is okay, but it doesn't turn me on. And then today I wrote an article about my concern that they hadn't fixed the fundamental problems with the Siri remote, which has been roundly condemned by no less than Ken Segal of the Observatory, who used to work with Apple in strategy and product marketing. So I was elated and happy and pleased that Apple's in the 4K game. It's time. I was exceptionally pleased that Apple had convinced most of the studios to sell 4K movies at HD prices, because the studios, as I read and understood, wanted to charge a premium because it's 4K content, it's premium content. It should cost more. DVD sales are down. I assume that means Blu-ray sales as well. So the studios have to make up for that by having new revenue streams and increased revenues. And so having a slight $5 to $10 premium for 4K movies seemed a natural thing to do for the studios. I was doubtful that Apple could swing that. Hats off to Eddie Q. He pulled it off, except for Disney, I heard. And if you have a 1080p movie that you've bought and it's available in 4K, Apple will upgrade it for you if you want to. So that's cool. So it's kind of mixed feelings. Apple's a little late to the game. They fell into 4th place in market share. Roku is the market leader. Roku has been on the 4K bandwagon for a long time. They have a product now called the Roku Ultra, which is not only 4K but HDR10. It's $99. So Apple's got its work cut out for it with a higher priced product and coming from behind and trying to establish itself as a technology leader in the 4K revolution. Got a lot of work to do.
John, so many pieces here I want to dissect just a little bit, but
Sure.
I'm going to at least start in reverse mode. You say that Apple is in fourth place, Roku is number one, and I don't know how those stats are computed, because all of a sudden I feel like I'm seeing an awful lot of Roku-based 4K, Roku-based TVs, 4K and otherwise, out there, and I'm just wondering if that's part of the way that they're getting into this. That smart TVs are Roku based. Not all of them, obviously.
Roku struck a deal. Now that you reminded me, I think Roku struck a deal to include their hardware with some selected televisions or integrated into. I don't remember the details of that. I don't think that is what was driving it. I think there was two things. One was price, $59 for a 1080p. And the other was being recognized as a market leader in 4K and then 4K HDR. So I think those two led in. I think that helped Amazon too with the Fire TV and their streaming of Amazon Prime content in 4K, some of it. Yeah. So the people's perceptions about a company being on the technical edge and leading and learning and delivering, that affects people's purchase decisions about who the player of the future is going to be. And so for a long time, Apple kind of lingered with its fourth generation product. And that's why I got on Apple's case for the last couple of years about that.
Okay. So 4K. Now I want to be real careful with this because you're a very technical guy. I consider myself a bit of a geek, but there are times that I feel like I'm shifting a little more to being what I will refer to as a practical geek. 4K definitely is a better, if the content is there, definitely a better picture. HDR, I think, is also a definitely better picture, demonstrably better. For a long time, it seemed like the TV industry's tried to throw things at us. They tried to throw 3D at us. And
that failed.
And it failed. Yeah. And then we had curved screens. That was the next thing.
That's not such a good idea either.
Yeah, I've stood in front of a curved screen, and I admit that I think there's a nice feeling to it if you're right in that particular sweet spot. But if you're off even a little bit, I think it loses the magic. And that magic was not there in a big way anyway.
Well, you can't sit at the radius of curvature of those TVs. The curvature isn't enough, and all it does is help reduce reflections in a room and look sexy, but it's not very practical. A curved display, when you're using, I'm talking to you on a Z34C Hewlett-Packard 34-inch curved display, and for close-up, curved is nice. It's pleasing. The radius of curvature is 3 meters, and I'm sitting 0.6 meters away from you, so I'm not at the radius of curvature either. Right. That's not the point. The point is to just be kind of look cool and reduce reflections. The 4K thing was a natural technical evolution in our ability to make the pixels smaller. But as we know, there's the retina effect. And I don't remember all the numbers, but I know that at about 55 or 60 inches, you have to sit closer to 6 feet to take advantage of the 8 million pixels. If you sit farther away than 6 feet from about a 50 or 55 inch TV, then it's retina. I mean, if you've looked at an HD TV from across the room, you realize that. So the TV industry was victimized by endless articles about how 4K couldn't be exploited properly unless you bought a really big TV or you sat really close. And they knew that wasn't going anywhere. So that inspired them to develop something called high dynamic range, which in concert with 10-bit color instead of 8-bit color allows a wider range in contrast and a wider range in brightness and better color with 10-bit color. So it's a dramatic improvement And so I'm here to tell you that, as you already know, HDR makes all the difference. And so no matter where you sit from a 4K TV, HDR is going to make the picture stunningly better if the content supports it.
Yeah. And I agree with that, because I recently was in the market for a new TV, and that's a whole other story. And I went in, and of course you're doing that side-by-side thing in a big box store. And, obviously the more expensive ones, whether they're tweaked to look better or whether they just are naturally better, they
have special videos.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Those videos come off a hard disk, and they're specially designed by production people to accentuate the features of the TV, whether it's HDR or it's color depth or whatever.
Right. And so, but I guess at the end of the day, I bring a TV home. I'm not sure that there are a lot of TVs out there, and there are some, no question, that I'm going to get home and say, boy, that picture really is not very good. It's side by side. Yeah, you can definitely see a difference, but depending on how much you're willing to spend, how good a picture do you really need? And where I'm going with this is, I'd like your comments on the levels of HDR and Dolby that Apple has built into the Apple TV. Are they adequate? Are they top end? Are they middle of the road? Are they low end?
As far as I know, they've got HDMI 2.0A, which is required to support all HDR technology. I've looked at the video specs, and it looks like they've got, the proper HEVC encoder in there. They've got the HDCP 2.2 for the encrypted handshaking. One of the things I wanted to mention was something I learned recently that's really cool, and that is just is chroma subsampling, where in your 1080p picture, in order to save on bandwidth, not every pixel gets information about luminance and color. And so there's a subsampling, and 4 pixels on a high-definition TV share the information. It's called 422, and most broadcast stuff is either 420 or 422, which means for every 4 pixels, there's only 2. The sampling on the 2 dimensions is given by how much data you got. And so there's only 1 pixel that has all the full luminance and chromiance data that's shared amongst the pixels. Well, when you run that into a 4K TV, you've got 4 times as many pixels. Each pixel on a 4K TV gets that information. And so 1080p TV can look a lot better in 4K. And that's assuming that the scaler is good.
Okay.
And so we can talk about scalers if you're interested, which is a subject of interest to me.
Definitely. What is a scaler? Because we talked about this pre-show. What is a scaler, and how does it affect the picture?
Even if you buy a 4K TV, probably 99% of your viewing for now is going to be high definition. So you're going to have 2 million pixels being thrown at the screen, which has 8 million. And so a scaler takes 1 pixel and uses its nearest neighbors in a mathematical algorithm to figure out incrementally through interpolation and a mathematical algorithm what the 4 pixels should look like that were originally just the 1 pixel in high definition. And the scaler is hardware, and it analyzes the surrounding pixels to figure out how they should look to fill out the 4 million pixels. And most TVs have pretty good scalers, especially the 4K TVs. And Sony is known for having really high quality scalers. So if you are concerned about how much extra you're paying for Sony's, part of it is the name, part of it is the scaler, part of it is the quality. Apple TV 4K has a scaler in it. And I was wondering, well, why does Apple do that? And so I asked David Katzmeyer at CNET about that. And he said, well, if all your content is scaled from the get-go, Apple TV is delivering a scaled 4K picture to your 4K TV all the time, and you never see any change in resolutions. Whereas if the TV does the scaling, it has to figure out what's coming in and then do a little blip and figure out what to do and scale it. And you may see notifications, or you may see screen changes that reflect the changes in the signal coming in. So that's one reason why Apple TV has a built-in scaler. It's just always on and always delivering a 4K signal. that scaler costs money because it's hardware. How much it costs from an OEM standpoint by Apple, I don't know. My guess is that it's a good hardware scaler is like $20 to $30.
Wow.
So that's maybe one reason why the Apple TV costs more than, say, a Roku. I'm guessing.
Okay.
Educated guess.
So I want to make sure I understand this. So if I buy a 1020 movie, or
1080,
1080 movie, I'm still getting a 4K picture delivered. It's basically an interpolated picture. It's a scaled picture, but I'm still getting a 4K picture delivered to my 4K TV.
Right, but it might well look better than a 1080p picture on a 1080p TV if the scaler is really good. And two, thanks to that chroma subsampling where every 4K pixel gets the luminance and brightness data. So that's why a 4K TV could potentially, if it's a quality one, make your 1080p picture look better than even a 1080p TV. And then there's a whole other issue of whether it's OLED or whether it's backlit LCD and how black the picture can get and the luminance levels. That's why I'm after OLED. I have a plasma. It's a really old plasma, but boy, plasmas have great contrast ratios. And when the picture's off, it's off. The pixels are self-illuminating just like OLED. So when it's off, it's off. You don't have to worry about matrix illumination. You don't have to worry about the economics of side lighting. You don't have to worry about having matrix regions where you turn off the backlighting to make a picture dark, because LCD TVs, no matter how good they are, they still have to use polarizers to block the backlight coming through, and there's always some leakage. And in fact, there's a trade-off there between the leakage and the pixel response. The stronger the polarizer to block the light and give you high contrast ratios is to make the blacks blacker, the slower the response time. So there's been an engineering battle for the past few years to try to make a trade between how fast the pixel can respond and how much light it can block to give you blackness, black levels, and good contrast. Those are things you don't face at all when you go to OLED. OLED has a very fast response time in pixels. So even if you buy an OLED TV that has a 60 hertz refresh rate, it's going to be like plasma. You're going to be able to see the puck go across the rink into the net with no problem. My 60 hertz plasma has no trouble with ice hockey. So, and then some of the newest OLED TVs have 120 hertz refresh rate, where they interpolate between frames to give you a smoother motion. So that's why it's probably a decent time to think about buying a 4K TV these days, because HDR10 is in place. It's a standard. It's an open standard. Dolby Vision is included in many TVs, not all of them. Hybrid log gamma is coming along, which allows the TV to simulate high dynamic range in broadcast video, because broadcast system, the ATSC broadcast system, has no transmission protocol for the metadata that controls the brightness levels. So there's a mechanism to trick the broadcast system into doing that. And Apple TV has that. So you'll be able to watch live sports, because there's to do HDRs post-production, you take the frames and you apply the metadata to tell the signal how to get brighter on the receiving end. Well, when you're having live sports and things go from bright to shadows, or the camera angles change, you don't know what the situation is going to be, because you don't ever know how the producer is going to change the setting, the camera angles, and so on the scene. So you can't apply metadata to live sports. So there's no HDR, hence hybrid log gamma, to try to solve that problem. So Apple TV has that. So it's kind of forward thinking. And I think if one were to buy a 4K TV now with HDR10 and Dolby Vision, and buy an Apple TV 4K, you're going to be good for years. I've looked at the roadmap from the UHD Alliance, and there's some cool stuff coming on down the road, but it's going to be down the road. 8K, 240 hertz. Now we're going to be good to go for a while. But that said, I had a very eye-opening discussion with John Keat, one of our writers. And John Keat has an OLED LG. And he's a very successful attorney. And for a time, he had 4 65-inch LCD TVs turned vertically to create a 21 by 9 panel on a wall so he could do whiteboarding, glass cover. And I got to thinking that if you think 4K is the end of your technical career in life, you're probably wrong. If you see see things about 8K televisions coming and think, well, grown, they're just trying to, jerk us around and keep us paying more money. That's not true. The technical evolution is going to keep coming. And it's going to be a transition between what we have now and the holodeck of Star Trek. And there's going to come a time when we have a whole wall. And it's still going to cut. The price is going to stay pretty constant. A really good TV costs what a MacBook Pro costs. All right. So for constant price, the technology is going to keep getting better and better. So one of these days, for $2,000, you're going to have half a living room wall covered with a display like from a football stadium or a baseball stadium. And we'll look back on these 50 or 60-inch TVs that were sitting in the corner, and we'll go, oh, those are the good old days when we had a little tiny TV sitting in the corner. And people will laugh at it today like we laugh at 21-inch CRTs from the past with standard dynamic range. So it's going to keep evolving. Yeah. And it's going to be a fun thing to watch.
21 and 28s for the CRTs were big deals for a long time.
That's right.
So.
That's right.
Okay, so let's pull down to let's pull down almost to a little more practical. And I don't know if you've had a chance to compare this yet, but how do the stats for the Apple TV shape up against the Rokus and the Chromecasts and the Fire TVs?
That's a good question. I should have done a comparison chart before I came on the show. I know that the Roku Ultra has HDR10. I do not believe, I could be wrong, but I do not believe it supports Dolby Vision at this time or HLG. So as I said before, the Apple TV 4K is very forward-thinking. I don't think the Fire TV, I could be wrong, but I don't think the Fire TV has HDR yet. I think it might just have gotten it. I don't know about the Chromecast. I'm not familiar with that as I should be.
Okay. Look for an article on TMO sometime soon.
Yeah, we should do a comparison chart.
This edition of Mac Voices is supported by Care.com, the easy and reliable way to find and manage care for everyone in the family. If you've ever faced the need for personal care of a loved one, you know what a daunting challenge it can be. Your loved one wants to stay at home. You want to respect those wishes, but also want to be sure that they're receiving the care they need. That can mean everything from meals, errands, housekeeping, transportation, and personal care, the whole way down to simple companionship. Who do you trust? Who should you listen to? Where do you go to get reliable information? Care.com, that's where. Care.com can help you find the kind of care you're looking for your parents or other relatives so they can stay independent. And not just care based on the medical or physical needs. Care.com recognizes that the best match, personally and emotionally, as well as a skills-based match, is essential. I can tell you from personal experience that if the personalities don't mesh, you can end up with a bigger problem than you started with. The kind of care we're talking about can be very expensive, especially if you employ agencies or opt for facility care. Care.com can help you cut those costs by as much as 50% by helping you select home-based options. That's a win in the financial column as well as for your loved one, and that means it's a win for you too. Find out about what all Care.com offers and how they can help you take on one of the toughest responsibilities of your life by visiting care.com/MacVoices. When you use that link, you can save 30% off a Care.com premium membership. So right off the bat, you're saving money and getting the answers you need. That's care.com/MacVoices. Even if you don't have need of their services right now, odds are that at some time you will. Get the information you need right now and be ready. Thanks to Care.com for their support of Mac Voices. How did you feel about the reappearance of an Ethernet jack?
I didn't know that it was gone. My Apple TV fourth generation is connected over Ethernet.
Oh, I thought at one point they were gone. It had disappeared.
No, optical audio disappeared
Optical audio.
on the fourth generation.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. I have it wrong. Yes.
Speaking of Ethernet, Jack, you can connect to your Apple TV with Ethernet or Wi-Fi to your home Wi-Fi base station. And I think for those listeners out there and viewers that this is a great way to secure your system, because these new smart TVs get on the internet. Some of them run Android. Some of them have built-in apps. You have the ability to download apps. As soon as you start downloading apps into Android, you could open up doors. My offhand feeling, and it's just an opinion, is that the TV makers aren't as sophisticated and when it comes to security as Apple is, because Apple has a lot of security experience with the iPhone and the secure enclave and encryption. So what I'm going to be doing is what I've heard a lot of people talk about doing, and the Magnolia expert at my local Best Buy does, is connect your Apple TV to the internet with tvOS, and iOS is very secure, and Apple continues to update it and protect it, and you've got a great secure operating system, which is a sibling to your phone operating system or your tablet operating system, iOS. And then turn off the Wi-Fi on your smart TV. Don't give it the password so it can't connect. And run one HDMI cable into your TV from the Apple TV or from your AV receiver. And let the smart TV be a dumb TV. And except for occasional firmware updates, leave the Wi-Fi off. Don't expose your TV to the internet so that people can attack it and hack it and find weaknesses in the operating system. Because it's Apple's business to keep us secure. It's other companies, TV makers, not necessarily in the business of focusing on security. I mean, I've talked to the Sony product manager for one of their TVs, and they say, yeah, we use Android, but we do a security check, and we don't make changes unless we've done our checks and we feel confident that it's secure, something I was interested in. Even so, I think it's probably wise to let tvOS be your intermediary on the internet and just run a single HDMI cable up to your TV and let it be a dumb display. And so some people may not want to do that. I talked to a Magnolia salesman at Best Buy, and he said, you know what? The Netflix app on my Apple TV delivers a better picture than the Netflix app on my Sony. And he hasn't figured out why yet.
So if I heard you right, then you're advocating just plugging your Apple TV, well, in your case, into an AV receiver. But for some of us who don't have an AV receiver, we would just take an Ethernet cable, run it from our router.
HDMI cable.
Well, no, yeah. What did I say? Ethernet. But
from not many people can run an Ethernet line from their home Wi-Fi base station into their Apple TV, so they have to go over Wi-Fi.
Right, but you would still do that as opposed to
still do that.
Yeah.
Right, that's okay.
Okay.
And then you run an HDMI cable from your Apple TV up to the 4K TV, and then keep it off the internet. Right.
Okay. I did want to touch on the design thing. I'm surprised. I don't know what you wanted, because I'm afraid I'm with some of the commenters. I kind of like the little black hockey puck.
I know I'm alone.
Well, it's just
I resigned.
Well, just because it's very unobtrusive as opposed to some of the other boxes that I've had sitting around my TV that are, they kind of demand attention. The Apple TV just sort of does what Apple does. It works. It sits there. It's got one power light. So there's not a lot of overhead, I think, in any way with it. So I was not unhappy to see that form factor retained.
Some people attach it to the back of the TV for aesthetic's sake. They don't even look at it. My Apple TV sits on the TV stand. I can see where it is. I can see the light, so I know when it's booting up and all that when it's on. It's probably just my sense of aesthetics, but I thought that at this juncture, which Tim Cook referred to as what was the word I used in that article? Sort of a new inflection point in television, that Apple would punctuate that by giving us something that was beautifully designed and then fix the problems with the Siri remote, which I'd love to talk about in a second.
Definitely.
And sort of set a new standard for user interface and a new standard for how these devices look. I mean, it doesn't have to be like something you'd find on 10 Forward as a salt shaker, but it could be smoother and rounder and more technical looking to sort of punctuate that this is 4K. Well, you spend $199, you get it home and you pull it out of the box and you have this black brick. And my sense of design aesthetics says, well, I just spent $200 and it's this black brick and kind of a funky remote. And I had personally just wish that Apple had made me feel better about the way it looked. I don't know. I've never been a big fan of the black brick.
Okay.
But apparently I'm alone.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to turn you loose on the remote because this has been a bone of contention ever since the Siri remote came out. And in fact, in some ways, there was a bit of a bone of contention about the original Apple TV remote. Steve was notorious for, I want less buttons, I want less buttons. And then the Siri remote came and people were unhappy with it because of its design. So is this Johnny Ive? Is this a Johnny Ive thing where the design outweighs the function, or what? Why are they doing this?
I think that some Apple executives weren't paying attention, that they were busy with other projects, that they thought it was good enough, that it was swoopy and cool, and that customer perceptions didn't have to be drivers of the design. I looked at back when Apple had a store separated from the website, you could go in and put comments in about the product. And I found they removed that page with the customer reviews comments, but I found a Google link that showed that the Siri remote over the last few years has received a 1.5 out of 5 star rating. There are several complaints about it. One, it's too symmetrical. You can't tell which side is which. If you pick it up in the dark, you start sliding your finger along the edge and nothing happens. It's because you've turned it around. There's no visual cues. Two, if you put it in your pocket because the coffee table's too far away or you don't want to lose it in the cushions, you can brush it with your pocket and you can end up with spurious menus appearing on the screen, distracting from the viewing experience. It doesn't have an LED power light, which a device like this should have. You have to know how to go into setting. You have to understand that you need to go into the settings, find the right place, and see what the power level, the little power bar is of it. And I don't think a lot of people know how to do that. So when the battery dies, you think it's broken. Instead of the LED turning red on you, it's simple to look at. It's not wife or spouse friendly in that regard to figure out, what's going on with it. Honey, it doesn't work anymore. What do I do? The buttons are very similarly placed so that when you have it upside down, there's no visual cue. Apple made a half-hearted attempt, I think, to fix that by putting a white ring around the menu button in the Apple 4K Siri remote to say as a visual cue to get you oriented. But they didn't solve any of the other problems. And so we're constantly getting spurious menus showing up when we happen to brush against it, or it's on the coffee table and you reach for it the wrong way. You get these menus showing up, or you pick it up the wrong way. It's not very big. It's kind of really small to handle in your hand. It's easy to lose. The buttons are not backlit. I mean, if you're going to have a first-class device, it should be big enough to not lose. It should feel comfortable in your hand. You should know what the orientation is by feeling it. The button should be backlit, and you shouldn't be able to accidentally bring up the menus. None of those issues have been seriously addressed. And so I wrote an article today about that. And that was another disappointment when Apple made its announcement on Tuesday, I thought this was an opportunity to fix some of those issues. And the first thing I thought of was the original iMac's hockey puck mouse. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Where it was ambiguous in how to hold it. At least there's a cord coming out, and you could sort of feel your way around it by looking at the cord. But it was too ambiguous to figure out how to hold it and touch it. And I found an article by Ken Segal, who's a very famous product strategist who used to work with Apple in product design and Steve Jobs. And in October of 16, he wrote a blistering article talking about how the problems with the Siri remote are even worse than the original hockey puck mouse. So I thought, wow, he thinks like I do in the comparison to products. It's just if Apple's going to compete, if Apple's going to make a splash in the 4K market, if they're going to have a showcase device for their original TV content, and they've hired some serious horsepower executives from Sony and WGN to manage their original content, and they're going to start selling 4K content, then they need to have a flagship product, and that means beautiful, elegant design, praiseworthy. I was kind of disappointed.
I agree with everything you said, all the problems with the Siri remote. I haven't found it as objectionable as some people, I guess, because I just say, okay, this is what it is, and now I need to learn how to use it. Obviously, I've had some of those issues. I've picked it up in a dark room and had it aimed wrong, and then try to figure out why things aren't working. But again, I guess I come back and question, this is not the first time that it feels like there have been design decisions made that really place design over function. And it's happily, I don't see it as a trend with Apple, but I do see various occurrences of it. One of my favorite ones was iOS, I've lost track, iOS 9, I guess, was the one with the thin fonts. And if I have that wrong, sorry, but one of the revisions had thin fonts that had to be tweaked a little bit later. And yeah, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous, but not practical out in bright sunlight or for people that maybe are a little visually impaired in one fashion or another. It always surprised me that, okay, that's great, and they're doing such a great job with design in so many ways, but once in a while they sacrifice function, and that bothers me a lot because in my world that should never happen.
I agree, and it took a long time, even under Steve Jobs. I watched that process, and while it was being roundly criticized, you would have expected Steve Jobs to come into a meeting and bang his fist on the table and say, I want a new one next week. Didn't happen. It lingered on for a long time, even under the just fastidious and picky Steve Jobs, who could raise bleep when he wanted to. It took a while to get that mouse fixed. And so it may take a while to get this remote fixed. It was a golden opportunity because, there's this juncture here with 4K moving forward and the glorious pictures and high dynamic range and all the, great movies and the excitement. Why not fix that problem? Don't know why they didn't do it. Maybe Eddie Q was just too busy working on the content deals and the subscription service and all the other things.
It does, and no apologies for anyone intended here. Apple does seem to have a lot of oars in the water, and it's very easy for you and I to sit here and talk about and criticize certain aspects of one product because we've done it on MacVoices before. We talk about the Mac Pro and we talk about the iMac, and why.
Oh, don't get me started on the Mac Pro. Well, I'm talking to you on a 2013 Mac Pro, by the way.
Yeah, and
don't get me started.
No, well, and again, listen, they've made some decisions and they've made some questionable decisions, and hopefully they're rectifying that, especially when it comes to the Mac Pro.
Yeah, they have.
But
I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, well,
I probably won't be able to afford it. Looking at the iMac Pro.
Yeah.
It starts at $49.95. What are they going to do with the Mac Pro? It's going to be a supercomputer. It's going to be $7,000.
Sure.
And 50 teraflops.
Yeah, but I hesitate always to pick apart things a little in too much detail in these kind of in these discussions because
it's delegation.
It's delegation, but it's priority too.
There needs to be a Apple TV product manager needs to say, this is my vision. This is how I want to go ahead. I don't have to keep running to Phil Schiller and Eddie Q to get permission to make my mark in this market and to have a vision and design this product the way I want it to be in light of my customer feedback and how I feel about the competition and so on. And I sense that there isn't that authority with Johnny Ive and Phil Schiller and Eddie Q being really calling the shots.
It's a good point. It's a good point. At some point, everyone has to be accountable to somebody. But you would think that, okay, if you're the Apple TV product manager, the lead product manager, you could say, okay, here are the 5 things that our customers have given us feedback on that are not favorable. Let's fix them. But you're not inside Apple. Neither am I. So,
que sera, sera.
Yeah. At the end of the day, John, are you going to buy one?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I've been doing a research project on moving to 4K because my plasma is 10 years old and it could die anytime. And that 10 years for a plasma is long enough. And so I've been inching closer to the 4K revolution. And the Apple TV kind of just like good timing fits in with everything.
I want to wrap with that. The timing of this, there's been so much discussion. We started out that, Apple feels like they're a little late to the game. But up until relatively recently, the 4K content and your discussions about a scaler were excellent because, I think that's one place that everybody was talking about upscaling. My TV upscales. Well, sometimes it looked like it did a good job and sometimes it didn't. But now we have...
Well, you can't upscale SDR very well at all. There is no scaler known to man that can deal with standard definition content. Because there's just... You're going from 480i to 2160p. It's mathematically impossible. If you're going to buy a 4K TV and you've got any standard definition content to look at, it's going to look terrible, even with the best scalers. So anyway, return from subroutine.
Yeah. No, you're right. But I guess there hasn't been a lot of 4K content out there. And now we're finally starting to see it delivered through Netflix and Amazon and some of the other places. Your local cable TV is nowhere near 4K.
Well, let me editorialize on that for 30 seconds.
Please.
Okay. I went through the HD revolution myself in 2007. I bought a Blu-ray player. I bought a plasma. And at the time, DirecTV had very little HD content. But we enjoyed watching the HD content, what there was. And we bought a Blu-ray player, and in time, Blu-ray movies were more and more dominant. We had fun buying our favorite TV series on Blu-ray. You don't have to have 100% 4K content to enjoy the transition. Living through the transition is a process of picking the right time, picking the right equipment, and then watching the 4K content when it's available and enjoying it, and then living through the evolution as you get more and more content coming in. And that doesn't take very long. But if you've already got the system in place, you're living through the transition, and it's fun. And you can enjoy that process as more and more content comes in. But if you just say, well, there isn't enough content. How does one establish a metric? Do you say, well, there must be 75% of my content is 4K or I'm not going to buy a TV? No. When the time is right and you have the money and your old equipment's not longer cutting it anymore and you want to be involved in the revolution, there comes a right time. And I think this fall of 2017 is a very good time to say, okay, I'm going to put my toes in the water. There's plenty of 4K content now to enjoy. And there's only going to become more of it. And as that happens, you live through the transition. And I've done that in high definition. And there's hardly anything I watch in SD. On DirecTV, I don't think there's any channel that I watch. Occasionally there's a TV commercial that blops in standard definition inside a box because the advertiser's so cheap. They haven't updated it to HD. But 99% of my stuff is high definition now. And it's been a gradual process over the years, and it's fun to be engaged in that. So don't set an arbitrary standard.
No, but I think you just made my point for me. And you're sitting there, you're a guy that is sitting there with a 10-year-old plasma TV, and you haven't seen fit to get into 4K up to this point. And so given
Right.
that, and with all your technical expertise, John, you're one that could appreciate the technical parts, even if the picture wasn't there. And that's why I kind of reject some of the people that say, well, Apple's late to the game. I don't know if Apple may not have been leading the pack, but
Depends on whether you're thinking about it from a sales standpoint or from the appearances of technical leadership standpoint.
Okay,
You
that's fair.
can sit there and say, well, there's no market for this product. There's no need to sell it because the 4K revolution is not in full swing. Or we can put it out there, demonstrate that we're on the learning curve. We're building 4K products, and then we're building products with 4K and HDR. And we're involved with the industry, and we sit on the standards committees, and we advertise this in the home theater magazines, and we go to CEDIA, and we have a booth at CEDIA, and we are recognized as a leader in the technology. And so we're involved, and look at us and look at what we're doing, and we're on the bleeding edge. If you want to buy the best, you come to us. Companies do that all the time, especially Sony.
Yeah, but the Apple TV has been a quote-unquote hobby.
Yeah, well, what I'm afraid of is that in a few months from now, what we'll see is the Apple TV 4K sitting on the shelves of the Apple retail stores and just sit there. And Apple won't do anything to celebrate its emergence as a 4K leader.
Oh,
I'm afraid of that.
yeah. And hopefully this conversation has given people a little better understanding of just what is under the hood. I mean, it's real easy for Eddie to stand up there and say, okay, here's this picture and here's this picture, and doesn't this one look so much better? But, if you understand a little bit more of the depth of it, there was a pun in there somewhere, didn't intend. But if you understand some of the reasons that the Apple TV 4K may be a better device than the Roku, than the Chromecast, than the Fire TV. I'm afraid, I'm with you, I'm afraid that people are just going to see this as, okay, this is another way to get my movies, and they're going to look better, but how much better is better is important.
That's why it's so important for Apple to educate, continue to market, continue to celebrate, continue to advertise, continue to make the case, continue to prove themselves now an emerging leader as opposed to a follower.
Right.
That makes all the difference in the customer perceptions.
Yeah. I'm hoping we will see that. The 4K.
Yeah, me too.
As we record this, well, let's see. I get lost in time zone math, John. You won't have to stay up get up as late or as early as I will to place your order, but the orders go out tonight, and I guess we should have them next week.
Oh, you have the Apple TV 4K?
Yeah. I forget now exactly what the delay was.
I forget the date myself. Yeah. I'm not really worried about it because I'm planning on buying it in about a month or so, and I'm sure they'll be readily available. Yeah. I don't expect there to be a waiting line. I expect to be able to walk into the Apple retail store in a month and just be able to pull one off the shelf.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to that, to hooking it up and seeing just what it can do, because it sounds like when they did finally refresh it, they've given it a decent refresh, with the possible exception of the remote.
Yeah. So, it'll last a long time.
Yeah. John, we've gone into a whole lot of detail, and I want to make sure that folks, I will have links to your articles on TMO about the Apple TV 4K and the Siri remote.
Cool.
How do people best get in touch with you if they want to discuss this further?
I'm senior editor at the Mac Observer, www.macobserver.com. And you can reach me on Twitter at jmartellaro.
Great. John, it's great to see you. We have to do it more often. No question about it.
All right. Cool. All right. It's been fun.
Yes. We'll see you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. I hope we've given you a few things to think about. We kind of dipped into some very technical stuff. Hopefully we talked a little bit about some practical stuff and gave you a better idea overall about the Apple TV 4K. Let me know if you're going to buy one. I know I'm going to, and I'm anxious to see what it does, and I hope you're as anxious as I am too. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes, links to subscribe, and to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, the Mac Voices blog, the Mac Voices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and on MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard that helps you do more with your Apple tech. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.